Welcome back to the Farm Traverts. We love gardening on our homestead, but our garden is not as perfect as we wish it was. So today we're going to be talking about the 5 things we wish we had done different when we made our first homestead garden.
Farm Traverts.
The first regret that I have is that we made it just a little too small. I wish we had gone bigger because I think it's like one of those things, kind of like the chickens, where you start off small and then you're just inevitably going to end up with more. It's kind of like that. You make a small garden and you're most likely going to wish that you had more space to plant more things.
I want more.
And that's kind of how I feel. When we planted our garden, I just picked a random number. I picked 40 by 50, and there really wasn't any reasoning behind that. That's just what I picked. I remember your brother was in town helping us, and I was like, we have to take advantage of this because we hardly ever have anybody to help us. So he was here and willing to help. And so he was like, let's do it. Let's build the garden while I'm here. How big do you want it? And what do you want it to look like? And so just picked 40 by 50 and we just went with it. But now looking back, I'm like, that's not quite enough for all the things that I would like to plant. And so I wish we had gone bigger and then sort of left ourselves some room to grow into it.
Yep, I think that was definitely, and it feels, for us at the time, it felt huge. It felt like an enormous space because there's no way we could possibly plant enough plants to fill this entire garden. And I think we felt like that even through probably our first planting season, but I don't think we realized how addictive going out and harvesting food would be.
Careful, it's addictive.
And so as soon as you get to the end of one of our rows now, and your basket's 2/3 full, or maybe it's even your second basket full, and you're sort of looking down and you think, shoot, I could have done twice this, there's just, it can always be bigger.
We have the space for it, so we could have gone bigger. And we have the whole garden in a fence because our chicken's free range. And so it's a little bit of work to expand it. And I wish we had just expanded it from the beginning and then maybe covered up some areas with silage tarps or the black landscape fabric and just left it for when we were ready to add some more stuff.
Yep, I think we thought we're going to make this garden and immediately plant the entire garden fence to fence. And if we had realized or had the thought that, hey, we could make a humongous fenced in area and then just plant part of it and cover the rest, then we've left ourselves room. As it was, we didn't leave ourselves any room to expand.
And when we started, we only had 3 kids, and then we ended up with 2 more. And so our family was growing, and so it would be nice to have more of everything just to feed everybody.
Yeah, they eat a lot. And they love harvesting. It's one of the cool things about kids. They just love going out and picking food.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite things is just watching them out there just eating as much as they want.
Yep. So the second regret that we had for our garden is in the garden we made raised beds, but the space between the raised beds, the paths, is too small for a wheelbarrow. And that was an enormous oversight. I think we thought, well, it needs to be wide enough to walk, and we were already dealing inside of the fence because we made the fence smaller than I think we wish we had made it, and we wanted a certain number of raised beds in there, and so when you did the math, that left not enough room for the paths that we ended up really wishing were there. So it's really, really sort of a sad. The more dirt we carried in, the sadder it got that those paths would not accommodate a wheelbarrow.
Yeah, I think our reasoning at the time was because we built all of our raised beds out of scrap wood. And so it wasn't this like uniform wood that we were working with. And so our rationale at the time was if we're going to err on one side or the other, let's err on the side of making the planting beds bigger so we can grow more food. And so we sort of intentionally made these paths too small. And now it's such a pain to bring in compost or mulch, like the gymnastics stuff that you have to do to like get the wheelbarrow over some of the beds to then go down the aisle. It's so frustrating every time.
That's true. Yeah, we actually modified the wheelbarrow will fit if you tip it so the back of it. So we actually modified our wheelbarrow to be able to fit down these paths. We had to take the front bar off and we had to shorten the legs. So we have this Frankenstein of a wheelbarrow simply so that we can get it and navigate through these very narrow paths in the garden. So it's not recommended. Wish we had just expanded the space and then had bigger paths.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I think that we maybe could have left more space in that first, like when you first walk in the garden. That way you have, when you're taking the wheelbarrow in, you can have enough room to turn. So that initial spot by our gates should be a little bit wider than some of the other paths, I think.
Yep. Oh, yeah. That was a little bonus.
Yeah. Just came to me.
There you go. So much regret. It's just coming out of the works now.
Yeah. The third regret that I have is similar to that, and that is making our beds so wide. I think I looked on the internet and it said, because that was the first time we really did raised beds in our other house. We did an in-ground garden and we had the square foot garden, but that was kind of like already dictated how big those were going to be.
Yeah, we made a couple raised planting beds, or they were more like planters. They were not a long bed. So this was our first experience with it.
Yeah, and I think I looked it up, and everywhere on the internet says 4-foot beds, which I do not understand why that is like so prevalent, because a lot of people that I talk to now find it super hard and annoying to get into that middle section to plant everything. And where are you planting the most? In the middle section, especially if you have a trellis going down the middle, like we do on some of the beds with where we're going to plant tomatoes and green beans and everything that's climbing up this trellis. It all goes in the middle. And every time I'm like, my arms are just not long enough.
Yes, it's terrible on the back, well, especially with our planting beds, because you have to lean way over to get this stuff, and it's huge pain. And maybe it does depend a little bit on what you plan to plant, right? If you're planting, watermelon or a plant that really expands and spreads out, right? If you're planting something that grows vertically, like there is no reason to have a 4-foot wide planting bed.
Yeah, I mean, even you feel like that with your 6-foot frame.
Even I.
Yeah, I think even watermelon, like it's probably going to expand beyond your raised bed. You're probably, like, I think, was it your mom? She had a square foot garden and she planted watermelon and she would send us pictures and it was like halfway across her lawn. Like the watermelon just does not stay.
Yep. Yeah, the watermelon will travel.
So I think anything that you're planting, unless it was perennial, then you wouldn't have to keep planting there. But in general, I would say 3 feet or 3.5 feet even would be better than 4.
There you go. So the fourth regret, thing we would have done differently, wish we had done differently, and this is my number one biggest regret, and that was the layout of our garden. Specifically, the layout of our garden did not help us or do us any favors when it came to irrigating the garden. So one of the biggest things we realized after having a garden for a year and trying to water a garden for a year is that watering a big garden is a giant pain. And so one of the coolest automations that you can have in your garden on your homestead is an automatic watering system, right? So whether it's piping in water or drip tape, or you can buy irrigation systems that you just click together, right? Whatever it is that you use to automatically water your garden, that is a must do. And the layout of your garden can really make or break the how you have to use irrigation. So our layout of our garden, we had rows, but we also had perpendicular planting beds across the back of the garden, which was just terrible when it came to trying to get automatic water all the way to the back of our garden area.
Yeah, because when we started designing the garden, we didn't have the drip irrigation in mind at all. And I was just kind of like, let's be artsy with it. And we'll have these different size beds and they'll go different directions. And then after we had sort of built the back ones, we started looking into the drip irrigation and decided to do it. And so then we did for the last beds, or all the front beds. They're just long, straight rows, which isn't as exciting, but I love the drip tape. Like, I think the plants love it. They grow well because they're getting watered like slowly and deeply instead of just overhead for as long as you feel like standing there. And it's just so much less time. I can just flip a switch at our faucet at the house and the entire thing gets watered. And so I'm so happy that we did the drip irrigation, but wish we had just done the whole thing in these long straight rows so we wouldn't have had to go back and kind of figure out how are we going to get these things to these other random beds that are going the other way.
Yep, it was a lot of extra laying down of pipe, and we made the decision where we are in the winter, the temperature drops below freezing, so we made the decision to bury the pipes that we had below the freeze line so that we would protect them from bursting, if there was water in them. We also drain them during the winter, but so it's sort of double protection. But trenching out in our tiny paths and then getting all that extra pipe all the way to the back of the garden just so we could accommodate all these fun, super artsy planting beds that are sort of around the outside of the garden was really a pain and sort of a sad thing. But when I wish we could have just run the irrigation right across the front and had our drip tape going down each long straight row.
Yeah, so I think if you have any plans to do some automatic irrigation, just going straight and boring is the way to go.
That's us, straight and boring.
The fifth regret that I have has to do with the soil. So when we built all these raised beds, we needed to fill them. And a 40 by 50 garden is not as big as I would like we said earlier, but it's still really large. And so we needed a lot of soil. And it wasn't practical to get all that from just bags from the store. And so I called a local company, and had them deliver an entire dump truck worth of, it was half topsoil and half compost. And we filled all the raised beds, and I was like, this is going to be so amazing. Like, I'm going to have the best garden of my life. It's going to be like so enviable. And then I planted all this stuff in there and nothing grew. I planted all these beans, like nothing. And I couldn't figure it out. And then after some research, I realized, oh, like if you're getting this bulk soil delivered, it is not necessarily just ready to plant immediately. Really, what we should have done is get the soil delivered like 6 months prior to when we wanted to plant. And then it would have finished breaking down or whatever, and we could have grown stuff immediately after that. So what I ended up doing was buying a bunch of bagged soil, and that was expensive, and just adding it to those beds. And then I was able to grow a lot that first year, but the second year was way better than that first year.
That was, if you want to know one of the saddest things, it is watching your garden frog and toad style and nothing comes of, not even a sprout, nothing. It was just like we hadn't planted anything. It was brutal. And the whole time you're just like, should we just move back to the city? I guess this was a fun experiment. Let's just put our house on the market.
Yeah, it was so sad. It was nothing like the garden of my dreams that I had pictured in my head.
So since this was our first homestead garden, even though we had a bunch of regrets, I think it was so cool. We learned a bunch, and we even did a couple experiments in there. And even our experiments led to a couple bonus regrets, both of them having to do with grass.
Yeah, so we decided to leave the whole back of the garden with grass. The front of the garden, we put mulch and cardboard in all the paths. And the back, we were like, maybe it's fine to have grass back there. We can just bring the weed whacker in or whatever. I think maybe we had thought the mower, but we didn't leave the paths big enough for the mower. So it had to be the weed whacker. And that ended up being a just total failure in my book, because I think some people can do it if they have like really wide paths, but we did not. And so it ended up being very annoying to weed whack. And then the grass grows up into the raised beds and it's hard to get out. And so I would ban all grass from anywhere in the garden.
Yep, totally agree. I've never hated grass more in my life than when we were trying to get the grass out of our raised beds, when we left the grass just on the outside of our raised beds. Like, huge annoyance that we could have prevented if we had known. And to that note, as long as we are making sure there's no grass in our garden, I wish we had, when we were building the fence around our garden, and we actually trenched out, which I think was a good thing. We trenched out and buried the fence about 6 inches into the ground so that no little animals, rabbits or whatever, would be able to dig under the fence. I think that was a good thing. But grass can just grow right through the fence. And that's a huge pain to have to walk the perimeter on the outside and then walk the perimeter on the inside and weed whack, like however many times a summer we would have to. It's a huge pain. So if we had it to do over again, I would definitely take some sort of, weed barrier or fabric, something, weed fabric, and put that down to around the bottom of the fence to keep the grass out of the garden, not just out of the garden, but like out from growing through the fence.
Yeah, even like a foot away from where the fence starts.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like grass is, as much as I grew up playing soccer, I love grass. Man, I do not like grass around the garden. Do not like it.
Yeah, it just doesn't really have a place in there. So there you have it. Those are our top 5 garden mistakes, plus a couple bonuses.
Hate grass.
The things we would do differently if we were starting all over again. So hopefully you can either relate or that saves you from some headache later on.
Yep. If you have your own gardening regrets that we didn't cover, or you say, yeah, you know what, your number 1 is my number 1, go ahead and tell us about it. Leave us in a thing in the thing. I don't know what this stuff is. Leave us a comment in the comments, leave us a reply.
Please talk to us.
Do us a DM our thing.
No, not DM.
No, don't DM us. Tweet a Insta picture at us.